Joining me now is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
We really appreciate your being here. This is our first chance to talk to you since the horrific attack by Hamas against Israel on October 7th. Of course, now the ground offensive to eradicate Hamas is underway. Mr. Prime Minister, can you tell us how will you know when you have achieved your objective, and how close are you to that goal?
We've set a specific target, that is to destroy Hamas's military capabilities and to destroy its governance capabilities over the 2 million people that it holds hostage in Gaza. That is something that we are achieving step by step, and I assure you we'll complete the task. If you want peace, destroy Hamas. If you want security, destroy Hamas. If you want a future for Israel, the Palestinians, the Middle East, destroy Hamas. We're absolutely intent on achieving it. And what I can tell you, Kirsten, is given the extraordinary performance of the Israeli army in the last few days, the last few weeks, we're going to achieve it. We'll do it with as few civilian casualties as we can and with maximum casualties on the Hamas terrorists, which we're achieving day by day, hour by hour. We'll complete the task. Victory.
Do you think it will take months? Will it take years? What should people be expecting?
I don't think it's going to take the time that it took the United States and the international coalition to defeat ISIS or to defeat al-Qaeda. It took you many years. I don't think it's going to be many years, but I've set targets and not a deadline. And we're proceeding as quickly as we can, but also as carefully as we can, because we want to minimize civilian casualties, and we want to minimize casualties on our side while maximizing the casualties on of the Hamas terrorists. And we're actually achieving both. I would say the ground offensive that we began is actually reducing the amount of civilian casualties because the population, the civilian population in Gaza is heeding our call to vacate the territories, the zone of fighting, get out of harm's way. Even though Hamas is trying to keep them in harm's way, we're succeeding in that. So the level of civilian casualties is coming down, importantly, and our military successes are coming up. That's important as well.
Let's talk about what's happening at Al-Shifa Hospital. There are reports that there's been a loss of power, which has caused the death of patients and even some infants. And I know that Israel has said Hamas is headquartered there. Even if that is the case, does that justify jeopardizing the lives of sick people and babies, Mr. Prime Minister?
No, on the contrary, we offered actually last night to give them enough fuel to operate the hospital, operate the incubators and so on, because we have obviously no battle with patients or with civilians at all. And I think every civilian death, every dead baby is a tragedy. But that tragedy should be placed squarely at the responsibility of Hamas, that is keeping its military installations inside hospitals, its command posts inside hospitals, inside schools, inside UNRWA, UN facilities, and so on. So we obviously don't want to give them immunity, but at the same time, we're sensitive to this issue. So we offered this help. They've refused it. I've offered something else. I've said, let's build field hospitals. I asked the Emirates. I asked the French president who sent a floating hospital ship. We've asked other countries to, the UN, UNRWA, and so on, build field hospitals. Let's move the patients out of these Hamas command posts in the hospitals to these safe places. So far, they've moved a few patients, not enough. I hope more will move. We're trying to deal with this as carefully as we can while not giving sanctuary to Hamas.
I just want to be very clear, though, on the fuel, because the Red Cross says it is ready to get fuel into Gaza, into these hospitals that so desperately need it, where lives depend on it. Do you have a plan to get the fuel in and to get the fuel to these hospitals?
Well, we just offered Shifa Hospital the fuel. They refused it. So the fuel to run the hospital. See, what happens is they want the Hamas that is hiding in the hospitals and placing itself there, doesn't want the fuel for the hospitals. They don't give a hoot about the patients. They don't give a hoot about the civilians. Their spokesman said this. They said, Hamas is underground. Above ground, the civilian population, that's Israel's and the UN's responsibility. They don't care about the civilians. They don't care about the patients. But they want to get fuel that they'll take from the hospitals to their tunnels, to their war machine. the electricity they need to fire the rockets. They fire 10,000 rockets as we speak in Israel against Israel cities. And they continue to fight from those underground bunkers. So what we have to do is separate the two. We'll try to help those who need it in the hospitals, but not help the Hamas war machine.
Let's talk about the hostages. There are reports that there is a possible deal that would involve getting out women and children and the elderly. How close are you to reaching a deal to get more of the hostages out?
Well, Kirsten, I can say that we weren't close at all until we started the ground operation. In fact, we heard that there was an impending deal of this kind or of that kind, and then we learned that it was all hokum. It was nothing. But the minute we started the ground operation, things began to change.
So is there a potential deal, Mr. Prime Minister? Is there a potential deal?
There could be, but I think the less I say about it, the more I'll increase the chances that it materializes. And it's a result of pressure, military pressure, the extraordinary work that the IDF is doing, putting pressure on the Hamas leadership. That's the one thing that might create a deal. And if a deal is available, well, we'll talk about it when it's there. We'll announce it if it's achieved.
Do you know where all of the hostages are being held right now, Mr. Prime Minister?
We know a great deal, but I won't go beyond that.
Okay. There are a lot of mixed messages, as you know, coming out about what has been agreed to as it relates to humanitarian pauses. Can you be very clear for our audience? What has Israel agreed to in terms of daily humanitarian pauses? Have you agreed to 4-hour daily pauses?
Yeah, let me be clear on what we agreed on and what we don't agree on. What we don't agree on is give a ceasefire to Hamas, with the exception of one intended for the release of our hostages. We're going to continue this to the end. We have to have victory. There's no substitute for victory, and we'll destroy Hamas, again, for our sake and for the sake of peace in the future. But in addition to that, we're fighting a war in which we are doing our best in a way that very few armies have done, to give a corridor, a safe corridor for civilians to get out of harm's way. As we're doing that, Hamas is firing on the safe corridors that we're giving to the Palestinian civilians. So against all these obstacles, we're still calling on civilians to leave. And for that, we create pauses. That is 4-hour pause, 3-hour pause, and this in a particular area, while the fighting proceeds elsewhere, to let the civilians out of harm's way. That's what we've been doing. We've been doing this with the cooperation with President Biden and the administration, and I think it's the right thing to do. We've created a humanitarian safe zone in southwest Gaza, below the fighting area, south of the fighting area. We've pushed in humanitarian aid to help those civilians, and I think it's a combination of the two things. Fight Hamas, don't give them safe haven, but allow the Palestinian civilian population to reach a safe zone.
Mr. Prime Minister, as you know, even those in the South say they do not feel safe. French President Emmanuel Macron has said there is, quote, no justification for the ongoing bombing of civilians. All over the world, you've seen protesters who are calling for an end to civilian deaths in Gaza. Can you win this war without global support?
We will win this war, because we have no other choice. There's no life for us. There's no future for us and our neighbors if we allow the axis of terror led by Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and their minions to dominate. We have an alliance for peace on the other side. It includes Israel, the United States, the moderate Arab states, and the rest of the civilized world. Now, it's a question, who wins? We have to win. There's confusion in many parts of the world. I have to say, not in the United States. I'm glad to see that the majority of the American people support Israel. They understand that we're fighting the just battle of civilization against barbarism. But those who protest for Hamas, you're protesting for sheer evil. There are a lot of misguided people out there who don't know the facts. You're talking to people who deliberately targeted civilians, who raped and murdered women, who beheaded men, who burnt babies alive, who kidnapped little babies and Holocaust survivors, you name it. These are the people that you're supporting. Now, you cannot, it's like in World War II, the Allies are fighting the Nazis, okay? Chancellor Kohl of Germany said that Hamas are the new Nazis. So imagine now, the Allies are fighting the Nazis. They've invaded France after they were attacked by the Nazis. They go into the cities of Germany. Obviously, the Nazis are fighting within civilian quarters, and civilians get killed. In fact, many of them were killed. Millions were killed. Now, who do you protest against?
Well,
do you protest against the Nazis, or do you protest against the Allies? And what these people are doing is protesting for sheer evil. That's wrong. By the way, it's a condemnation. It's an indictment of higher education in some of our universities.
Mr. Prime Minister, as you know, a number of the protesters are protesting the actions by Israel. Even the Secretary of State saying, quote, far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. Let me ask you this. How many civilian deaths are you willing to bear in order to achieve your ultimate goal of eradicating Hamas?
If I had my way, there wouldn't be a single civilian death. If I had my way, no civilians would be killed. If Israel had its way and our calls would be heeded, they'll all be out of harm's way. And in fact, I'm saying this luckily now, unfortunately, hundreds of thousands have moved out of harm's way, heeding our calls and overcoming Hamas's threats at them at gunpoint not to leave the zone of fire.
Do you know how many civilians have been killed, Mr. Prime Minister? Do you know how many civilians have been killed? Do you have an accounting of the number?
I wouldn't trust the Hamas numbers. When you say Gazan officials, that's Hamas officials.
What's your number? What's your number?
It's lower than theirs. And what is most important, Kirsten, is that we see a steady decline in the number of civilian deaths as our ground action proceeds, because basically people understand that they have to clear the way and they leave. And remember, our goal, and we're taking extraordinary efforts to achieve it, is to minimize civilian casualties. This is our ethos. And here's the problem. We're faced with the most vicious kind of enemy who not only attacks civilians, but commits the other war crime of deliberately hiding behind their civilians. They use them as human shields.
Yeah.
They fire on our safe corridors that we give to Palestinian civilians. It's not Israel who's doing that. Yeah. So we have to, at once, try to focus our fire on the terrorists, try to minimize the civilian deaths, but at the same time not give immunity. Because I'll tell you what will happen, Christian. If this system, we'll do everything we can to minimize civilian casualties, but you have to do everything in your power to lay the blame for the civilian casualties on where it belongs, on Hamas. We don't want to make human shields an effective strategy for terrorists.
Mr. Prime Minister, I have a few more questions to get through, and I know that we're running out of time, so let me keep moving. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said just this morning that while Hamas has committed war crimes, the collective punishment by Israel of Palestinian civilians amounts also to a war crime. Can you definitively say right now that Israel is not breaking international law?
Yes, I can say that what the commissioner said is hogwash, because the main difference is, are you deliberately targeting civilians? No, we're deliberately doing everything in our power to target the terrorists, and the civilians, as happens in every legitimate war, are sometimes what are called collateral damage. That's a laundered way of saying unintended casualties. That's clearly what Israel is doing. And what clearly Hamas is doing is the opposite. They're doing everything in their power to have their civilians hurt, because they want this ridiculous and wanton attack on Israel, on Israel's legitimacy to take root. And unfortunately, people are giving into this. If we lose sight, if we lose the moral clarity of supporting the force that is fighting the terrorists that are hiding behind civilians and blaming the victim for these attacks, the victim who takes the just action to defend itself, then we'll never be able to fight the terrorists. Right. They'll always hide behind civilians, and we'll never be able to fight them.
Let me ask you about Gaza, Mr. Prime Minister. You said Saturday you are opposed to the Palestinian Authority returning to control Gaza after the war, and you say that Israel will control Gaza for as long as is needed. Are you saying that Israel would reoccupy Gaza, and what do you say to those who say there should be an international force that governs Gaza after the war?
Well, I think Gaza has to make sure that it's not a threat to Israel. We said destroy Hamas, and for that, if we want to have peace, we have to destroy Hamas. This is what Israel must do, and this is what Israel will do.
Would you accept an international force, Mr. Prime Minister? Would you accept an international force?
I think that the only force right now that can guarantee that Hamas, that terrorism does not reappear and take over Gaza again is the Israeli military. So overall military responsibility will have to be in Israel. As far as the civilian management of Gaza, we need to see the following two things. Gaza has to be demilitarized, and Gaza has to be de-radicalized. And I think so far, we haven't seen any Palestinian force, including the Palestinian Authority, that is able to do it. They teach their children to hate Israel. They're not fighting terrorists. They're paying for slay. That is, the more terrorists, Palestinian terrorists murder Jews, the more they get paid. And to this date, 36 days after the worst savagery perpetrated on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, the Palestinian Authority president refuses to condemn this savagery. So, we need a different authority. We need a different administration.
Who would that be?
Who would that be,
Mr. Prime Minister? Who would that be?
I think it's too early to say.
Okay.
Kirsten, I think it's too early to say, but I can say one thing. The first task we have to achieve is defeat Hamas. The first task the Allies had to achieve before they could reconstruct Germany was to defeat the Nazis. These, as the German Chancellor said, are the new Nazis. We'll defeat them, and then we'll work to have a demilitarized and a de-radicalized Gaza, which will give hope to these people. I mean, they're living under 16 years of horrendous tyrannical rule of Hamas. We'll liberate them, and we'll liberate ourselves from this horror, this scourge of barbarism that plagues not only us. It's not only our war. Kirsten, it's your war, too. It's the war of civilization against barbarism. We have to win it, and we will.
Very quickly, Mr. Prime Minister, as you know, many of Israel's top military, security, and political leaders have taken responsibility for the attacks on October 7th. Can you be clear? Do you bear any responsibility for missing the attack?
Well, I've said that after the war, there'll be a thorough investigation, and everybody will have to answer some very tough questions, including myself.
Do you bear responsibility?
Now we're focused on one thing.
Do you bear
We all bear responsibility.
Okay.
We all look. Nobody's going to evade responsibility. It's a non-issue.
But was your government distracted,
not because it's a non-issue, not because it's a non-issue, but because there'll be time to deal with it, and the time that we have to deal with it is right now to win this victory. After Pearl Harbor, after 9/11. Did you delve into that question? Of course you did afterwards. But the first thing that you did was unite the entire country, America, united to defeat the terrorists. And Israel right now, after our 20 9/11s, 20, proportionately, that's what we suffered, 20 9/11s on a single day. Right now, I'm uniting the country, and we're going to fight until we achieve victory, nothing short of victory.
What do you say to those who argue your administration was distracted by the months of protests due to your judicial reforms?
We weren't distracted at all. There'll be time to answer all these questions, and I don't want to get into that. But again, I think right now, rather than relitigating the past, which many people perhaps would like to do, but I think it's wrong. I think right now we have to focus every ounce of energy, every ounce of will and resolve to achieve our goal of destroying Hamas, because our future depends on it. We won't have time to relitigate the past if we don't have a future. Let's make sure we have a future. Let's defeat Hamas, which is, again, the battle to defeat the axis of terror. Because if Hamas is the integral part of this axis of terror, and you know what? Everyone is sitting on the bleachers in the Middle East and in the world, and they want to see who's going to win, the good guys or the bad guys. And history doesn't favor automatically the good guys. They have to muster their resolve, their courage, their determination to defeat the bad guys. Otherwise, we get into a dark age. It's happened before in history. We must make sure it doesn't happen again. That's what we're focused on. And I know that most Americans understand that we have to defeat Hamas for our sake and for your sake as well.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, thank you so very much for all of your time this morning. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.